Why choosing a global high-yield fund instead of focusing on regional products?
Right. Well, the advantage would be that a global fund has the ability to try to identify constantly and then allocate to the most attractive segments of the market at any point in time. That can be regional segments. It could also be certain sectors or ratings, if you like. But only if you have the global approach do you have the flexibility to do that dynamically and quickly. Differences in GDP growth, for example, and financial conditions result in differing returns from different market segments over a certain time period. And only if you have the flexible approach can you capitalize on these differences, perhaps.
You have an underweight position, US high yield. Why so?
Why so? It's clearly a global benchmark or a global fund usually has 70 to 80% in the US, and the rest is in Europe and some emerging markets high yield normally. Now, if you have this kind of a setup, you don't get much benefit of changing those weights in your portfolio. If you go from 80-20, say, to 90-10, there's not just such a big difference. But if you're 50-50 to begin with, and at all times you make yourself answer the question, where is it better to be, then going from 60-40 this way to 60-40 that way will have a bigger relative impact, I believe.
Is there nowadays a liquidity risk in the high yield market?
I think there is liquidity risk, and liquidity risk is part of the spread or the yield that you get paid to take on high yield exposure. Now, your question is particularly, is there a risk that the whole market tries to exit at the same time? There is always that risk in any asset class, whether it's high yield or equities or commodities. You need to ask yourself what would trigger such an event or such an outcome. And usually it's the very big impact, unexpected events that will cause that. And in such a situation, I think we're all in the same boat. So when the tide goes out, we all go out. But the difference between smaller funds and bigger funds really comes to play just during the normal times. When the small fund, who is being selective and maintains his liquidity in the portfolio, has the ability to react to credit-specific issues for single positions in a much easier way than a bigger fund which has much bigger positions in single issuers would have. So I think that's when it makes a difference.
Do you think there's still room for high yield spreads to tighten, considering the less friendly monetary policy in the US?
I believe so. I mean, ultimately and fundamentally, and away from this whole, the central banks holding the market by its hands, high yield is a GDP-driven asset class. It should be, and that's how fundamentally it happens. When growth is good, usually defaults remain low. So if rates go up because growth picks up so much, whether that's in the US or in Europe, doesn't really make a big difference. But if rates go up because there's much stronger growth, then fundamentally there is no reason why high yield spreads should widen a lot, because the default environment and the default outlook becomes even more positive for high yield than it is today.